Tyler, I don't understand why you be doing this to us. And then you say, everybody out there who has watched A Fall from Grace, do not give away the plot. Now, how are you going to request this when this movie is so good? You know we can't hold water. So for everybody out there who has not seen A Fall from Grace, listen, I'm sorry, Mr. Perry, but I'm going to have to talk about this movie. I cannot hold water. I don't know what you was thinking. You can't make a movie this good and then expect me to be quiet about it. Like, what is wrong with you? So, if you have not checked out this movie, it is on Netflix. It came out January 17th. And when I tell you, when this came out, even though it was my husband's birthday, we had a very eventful day. Honey, when we got done with our eventful day, I don't care how late it was, when we came home, we watched this film. But I couldn't review it right away because we had a very eventful weekend. So here I is to review this movie. This movie is crazy. I mean, I cannot with Tyler. I cannot. He knows exactly who his audience is. He know what we want to see, and he just keep feeding us. Like, I just don't, I mean, he just be having us hooked like we on crack, and he knows exactly what we want. So if you have not seen this, look, I'm going to spoil it. I always spoil it. I tell the movie from beginning, middle, and end. But if you know for a fact you're not going to see A Fall from Grace, and you don't have Netflix or anything like that, and you don't have access to see it, you could just stay around and listen to my review, and that can kind of like be a way that you're going to watch it. So just, just have a seat and listen to my review or whatever. But like I said, click off this video. I don't want to hear nobody talking about, oh gosh, I hate when people come and spoil stuff. I already done warn you, okay? Now, this movie has some heavy hitters in it. You have Tyler Perry, Felicia Rashad, Cicely Tyson, Crystal R. Fox, Bershia Webb, and this guy named Mehcad Brooks, if I'm not mistaken. It's just a lot of great people in this, so we're gonna go ahead and get this thing started. Okay, so the movie starts out real crazy. This lady is on the roof of the house, and she is up there saying, oh, I'm so heartbroken, I'm so sad, like all of my savings, all my money, I'm so heartbroken, how could he do this to me? And of course, this police officer is trying to calm her down, trying to talk her off of the roof or whatever. And so she jumps. She jumps off of the roof. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is starting out crazy. She jumped off the roof. I was like, oh my goodness. So that fall, like she dead. So anyways, now the guy who plays the police officer is this guy named Jordan, who is married to Jasmine, okay? So her husband comes in from this little ordeal or whatever. He gets in the bed and he's snuggling up with his wife or whatever. And she was like, hey, baby. And he was like, hey, honey, or whatever. And they just making a little small talk. But she could feel and notice that something was wrong with her husband from the way that he was talking or whatever. But she knew that he really didn't want to talk about it right then and there. So she was like, okay, I'm going to leave it alone for now. And we'll talk about it another time when you're ready or whatever. Because I know something is bothering you. But he tried to play it off like, it ain't nothing bothering him. So anyways, Jasmine goes into work. Now, Jasmine is a defense attorney, I believe, or whatever. And she goes into work, and her boss, who is Tyler Perry, he plays Roy. Her boss, Roy, asks her to come to the office or whatever, and she goes into the office and she was like, what's up? He was like, well, here's an open and closed case. I'm gonna give it to you because it's easy. Like normally when it's something easy like that, he gives it to her because she never really handled cases before. So anything that's kind of like an open and closed case, he trusts her to be the person to go ahead and take on the case. And so she was like, no, this story is really big. I don't want to handle it. Let my other two co-workers handle it. Now her other two co-workers are this girl named Tisla and Donnie. These are her two co-workers. So she was like, give it to them. And he was like, no, I'm going to give it to you. I don't want to hear no more fuss. You take this, go ahead on and go on out there. So her co-workers, Tisla and Donnie, was looking or eavesdropping or whatever. And of course, Tisla is so happy. She was like, oh, I'm so happy for you. I'm so proud. And Donnie, he's kind of like salty or whatever because I think because of how she handles cases, like she really doesn't go into depth to win. She always handles open and closed cases. So he was like, all people, he gonna give it to her. He wish he would have had it because he is more thorough, more adamant about people really being defended and getting people off so that they won't have to go to jail. So he's very passionate about his job. So he was kind of salty that she got the case. And she wasn't really happy about it because she really didn't want to do it. So she had to listen to them talk or whatever. So, anyways, it's time for her to go up to this jail. And as she's driving to jail in the car on her way up there, she's listening on the radio to the different viewpoints or opinions that other people, had as far as the case in the town or whatever. She was just listening to the different opinions. And a lot of the people think that this woman is guilty. They think that she killed her husband or whatever. Now, the woman in question is Grace. She is the one who murdered her husband, supposedly, allegedly. And a lot of people think that she's guilty. And they're like, just go ahead and give her the death penalty. Just no sympathy or whatever. They just think she's guilty. So as she's up there, she's hearing this on the radio. So she goes inside. Now, mind you, she is a nervous wreck because this is a big case and she's never really dealt with any murder crimes or different things like that. So she is just dog piss nervous. So she says, yes, she goes in. She says, yes, I'm here to see Miss Waters. Miss Grace Waters, and the police officer, he was like, okay, I'm gonna take you back there. And so they walking back there or whatnot, and she is just so nervous. And of course, all the women in there, when you've been in jail for a while, you see some fresh meat, you want that. So she's hearing all of that and she's getting even more nervous. So he take her to the room and she was like, is there anything I should be aware of? And he was like, what do you mean? She was like, just anything. And so he picked up that she was nervous and he was like, well, don't worry. She will be in handcuffs and then we have security right here. And she was like, oh, okay, thank you. So she's just sitting there and she's getting so nervous to the point where she actually, she flung all of her notes, her folders and all of that just went all on the floor. So she goes to pick it up. And as she picks it up, it just so happened she looks at the picture. I don't think she really looked at the pictures or anything inside of the files. Not on the scale and magnitude, like really, really researching it. Because like I said, she never really goes into depth. So she looks at the photo and she was like, she was just looking at them, looking at her ex-husband and her or whatever in this picture. And so she gathers her things and put it on the table or whatever. And then in walks Grace. And Grace comes in and she sat down across from this young lady. And Grace is just looking at her. And I know she was thinking in her head, like, this little young thing, like, let me just ask this girl a few questions. Because for one, she looks very young. So she asked her, she was like, how old are you? And she was like, 26. And she was like, And she said, where'd you go to school? And of course, she was like, Jasmine was like, well, I went to the community college, but then she had transfer over to like a university or whatever to finish out her law degree or whatnot. And of course, Grace was like, community college, like, how can I take this girl serious? Let me get this straight. She's young and she went to a community college but finished at a university. Okay. Yeah. So Jasmine was just like, well, let's just talk about the details surrounding your case. This is open and closed. And from my understanding, you want to go ahead and plead guilty. Is that correct? And Grace was like, yes, that is correct. And she was like, okay, well, if you go ahead and plead guilty, um, then I guess we don't really have much to talk about or whatever. And so Grace was fine with that. And she was like, well, I don't really care. I want to plead guilty. The only thing I request is that I be near my son. I want to go to a jail that's near my son so I can go visit him or whatever. And she was like, oh, okay. But as she was looking at her, she was beginning to get a little curious about her. But Grace was like, guard. She said, guard. And so the guard comes in and takes her whatever. So I guess she was done talking. She didn't really want to talk no more. Like, business is settled. I said I want to plead guilty. So there's nothing else to talk about. But Jasmine was like, okay. So she goes home or whatnot, and she gets to talking with her husband about it. And she was like, this is a new case and everything for me. Blase, blase. I don't know. Like, I don't know if I really want to handle this. Like, maybe I'm in the wrong profession. I don't really want to do this. And he was like, no, you got this. You got this, or whatnot, whatever, or whatnot. And so, anyways, later that day, her colleagues, her co-workers had came over. Tisla and Donnie had came over to discuss, how she's handling the case and how she's feeling or whatever. And so, like I told you, Donnie is feeling very, very salty because he's like, here this girl is. She's got a good case. It's very popular. She's not really looking to fight for this woman or defend this woman or look more into her case. And so he kind of like got into an argument with her about it. And she was like, what is your problem? Like, they don't even pay us enough to even represent these people anyway. And these people are just guilty, just flat out guilty. So what is your beef? What is your problem? And he was like, all is innocent until proven guilty. We can't just say that. Like, you need to be more passionate. I wish you were more passionate and more adamant and just really do your research on this woman. You haven't even looked at anything in the files. And he was just salty or whatever. So Tisla was like, man, just calm down, calm down. Like, we gonna leave because he is just, I'm gonna talk to him or whatever. So they leave. And of course, Tisla was arguing at Donnie. She was like, that's why we don't never get invited nowhere now, because you don't even know how to act or whatever. So, so she started, confiding in her husband and telling her husband how she feels or whatever. And he was like, just don't feel bad. Don't feel bad. And he was like, actually, I want to talk about what I was feeling the other night. And she was like, okay, what was it? He was like, I actually witnessed a woman jump off of the roof of a house. And she was like, oh my gosh. He was like, yeah. And he said, well, are you ready to talk about it some more, about how you're feeling? And she was like, I just don't know. Like, I don't know if this is the right thing for me. At first, when she first began school, she was saying how she was so passionate about it and it was something that she thought she wanted to do. But now that she's actually handling cases, but not really going into depth, she's feeling like she's not really doing what she thought that she wanted to do. Like, she doesn't feel very passionate about it and how she kind of regrets doing it or whatever. So he's just trying to console her or whatever or whatnot. And so the next day, Donnie comes strolling up in there at work and he was like, I just want to apologize for yesterday. I guess I got carried away. And he kind of like walked off. And of course, Tisla, whatever her name is, she was like, oh, you call that an apology? Is that your way of apologizing? And so Jasmine was like, I guess so, I guess so. So anyways, as they was talking or whatever, one of their other coworkers went up to Jasmine and was like, there is a Malcolm Waters here to see you. And she was like, who? She was like, Malcolm Waters. She was like, I don't think I had an appointment or whatever. She was like, no, you don't. So she said, okay, well, let me go see what this is. So she goes out there And now Malcolm, of course, is Grace's son. He comes up there. He was like, "Hey, how you doing?" She was like, "Hi. How can I help you?" He was like, "Look, Grace is my mom. She is a great mother. You're going to represent her, right?" And she was like, "Yeah, but your mother wants to plead guilty." He was like, "No, please, please don't let her do that. Like, I know my mom. She's a good mom. She don't even kill spiders. Not even if a spider was in her house. She would rather us just take it out so it can roam and be free. She couldn't kill a fly. Like, she did not do this. Don't let my mother plead guilty. Please help her. Please help her." And she was like, "I'm sorry, but there's nothing I can do to get her to change her mind. She wants to plead guilty." He was like, "Listen, just do what you can. Encourage her to not plead guilty." And so she was just looking at him or whatnot. So, anyways, of course, with him being that adamant about it, she kind of started like getting a little bit curious, trying to see what she can do or whatnot. So she goes up there to meet Miss Grace again. And she's sitting there. She was like, "Look, if you go ahead and plead guilty, then I think that's the best thing to do, because if this were to go to trial and we go to court and all of that, they could possibly give you the death penalty. And if you plead guilty, you'll get 15 years max, and then you'll get to be near your son in jail like you wanted or whatnot." And she was like, that's the best that they could do. And she was like, "Yeah, that those are your options or whatnot." And she was like, "Well, do you still want to plead guilty?" And this time, Grace didn't really say anything. She wasn't really saying anything that much, but she was just saying, "Okay, yeah, I'll plead guilty." And she was just acting a little bit different this time. And this time, Grace was just breaking down crying. She was just bawling, sitting there bawling. And then Jasmine just looked at her like, this woman is crying. This doesn't look like someone who is guilty. Like, if you're guilty of something, you wouldn't be reacting this way. So she began to get really curious at this point when she saw her, because most people who are guilty, they don't have that response or they don't react that way. So this is what gets her wheels turning. And this is where I believe she begins to have this passion for once in her life as a lawyer, so that she can get down to truth and to the bottom of it. So, of course, after seeing that, she goes home and she has trouble sleeping at night. Like, she couldn't go to sleep that night. So she gets up and she starts going through the files or whatever, looking for her next lead and who she can, get in touch with to see if she can get down to some answers or whatnot. And she's looking through the file, and she comes across a name called this lady named Sarah. And she circles the name and she calls her. And of course, Sarah answered the phone and she was like, "Hello." And she was like, "Yes, this is Miss Bryant. I'm working on a case, and I do understand that you are Grace's best friend. And I was wondering if I can come by and talk with you." And she was like, "Okay, yes, of course, sure, you can come by. That's fine," or whatever. And so, she goes to Sarah's house, and of course, Sarah is coming outside with this heavy uh, garbage can or whatnot. And she was like, "Oh, dear, can you help a old lady or whatever?" She was like, "This is so heavy." She was like, "Sure." So she helped her. And as she's helping her, she happened to glance up and she sees this old lady in the window. And then Sarah was like, "Oh, yeah, that's one of my tenants. That's Alice. Don't mind her. She doesn't have any family or anything like that. She's been here for years or whatever." And she was like, "Oh, okay." So she was like, "Okay, come on inside." So they go inside and she sits down or whatever. And I guess she's making her some coffee or whatever, tea or whatnot. And she was like, "Well, can you tell me a little bit about Grace?" And she was like, "Yeah, I've known her for a long time. She's had some hardships, She was really close with her son, but her son went off to get married or was interested in some girl to get married, and they wasn't talking as much because they used to be close. And then she started telling her about Grace's ex-husband. Now, the guy that she was married to, he cheated on her. He had an affair with his secretary. Now, her husband owns a mortgage firm or place or whatever. So, yeah, he had an affair on her with the secretary. So they got a divorce, of course, and that left her a little bitter. And she was upset about that. But Sarah was there through it all, trying to be a friend to her or whatnot. And so she just says, I kind of feel like all of this mess is my fault. And Jasmine was like, well, what do you mean? She was like, oh, you wouldn't understand, age would catch up to you. She said, when you get to be my age, well, she said, of course, I was a little bit older than Grace, but I didn't want Grace to end up like me. I'm older, I don't have nobody, and I just wanted her to be happy and not end up alone and lonely like me. She said, age catch up with you. One minute you're looking young and beautiful, like how you are right now, and then you end up looking like me. And she was like, oh, but she said, yeah, I'm the one who suggested that she gets out and mingle and date. And she was like, oh, you can't blame yourself for trying to help a friend. She was like, yeah, but sometimes I just feel a little guilty about it. If I had not suggested that she go out and mingle, then none of this would be happening right now. And she was like, well, where did they meet? She was like, oh, well, I actually introduced Grace to my photographer. And she was like, oh, okay, that's nice. She was like, yeah. And they actually met at an art gallery. And she said, matter of fact, hold on, I got a flyer or whatever of the place that is called where they met. So she goes and gets the flyer and bring it back. She was like, yeah, this right here, this is the place where they met. And so, of course, as she's talking to her or whatever, there was some commotion going on in the other room. And so Sarah was like, you know what? I hate to rush you, but my girls haven't ate yet. Some of my tenants that I help, they haven't ate yet. So we're going to have to cut this thing short here. You don't mind, do you? And she was like, oh, I'm sorry. I didn't know. She was like, sure, that's fine. So she's rushing, Sarah's rushing her, put on her coat or whatever. And as she's putting on her coat, she's hearing all this commotion. She was like, oh, it's nothing. Trust me, I got it. She was like, okay, well, if there's anything else you need, just give me a call. Sarah says that to her. And she was like, okay, thank you so much for your time or whatever. So she leaves out. So then it skips back to the time that Sarah and Grace kind of like is going back in time when she was going through the whole divorce or whatever, and after the whole ordeal with that. And they're just sitting, having some wine and drinking and talking about that. And so Sarah's just sitting there listening to Grace saying how trifling of a ex-husband he was, how he didn't even, because the old house that they had, they built so much together in that house, like everything. And he had the audacity to marry that woman in that house that they had built together, and didn't even change nothing out. They even left Grace's old drapes there in that house when they got married. He just was disrespectful, and it was just horrible. And so Sarah was like, ooh, that's a low down dirty dog for him to not even change your drapes when he was getting married in that house that y'all built together. And she was like, I know, right? And she said, I'm very angry, but not really. And Sarah was like, no, you can be honest. You was angry, wasn't you? And she was like, yeah, I was, because I thought that we would be together forever after everything that we built. And he goes and does that. And check this out. This girl is just old enough or young enough to be his daughter. She's only a few years older than my son. And Sarah was like, And she was like, I know. She's just young, and I guess he thought that I was just an old hag and just roll me on over and just forget about me. I guess I was cramping his style or whatever. And she was like, but that's one of the reasons why I didn't want anything. Because, like, when they got a divorce, she didn't want anything. She just let him have everything. She didn't try to fight for nothing. She just wanted her peace of mind, her sanity. She didn't want any ties to him or none of that. So, she was just saying all of that, and how she said, she was telling Sarah, sometimes it does get lonely. I'm just sitting here in this house by myself. I would like to trust again. I would like to laugh again. I would like to feel young again. I would like to love again. And so Sarah was like, girl, I don't know about the young part, but and so Grace was laughing. She was like, oh, girl, stop. But she was like, no, seriously, I can't make you be young again, but I can help you with your love life. And she was like, girl, what is you talking about? She was like, well, you don't need to be sitting in this house. You need to get out. She said, maybe you should try that online dating. Go to christiansingles.com or something like that. She was like, girl, get out of here. I don't believe in all of that. She said, if anything, what I want is something old fashioned. Just meet a guy the normal, regular way, somewhere out somewhere. Well, Sarah was like, well, you need to get up out of this house, if you want to meet someone, do something, and she was like, I can help you with that. She was like, what are you talking about? She was like, well, I can help you with that if you just go ahead and get out. She was like, you should go to this art gallery. There's an art gallery coming up that my photographer is doing, and you should go. She was like, girl, please. She was like, I'm telling you, you're not going to find love sitting in here. You should go or whatever. Just think about it. She was like, girl, please. And so Sarah was like, okay, don't say I didn't try to help you, but you really should consider it. And so Grace is just sitting there smiling, like giving it a thought or whatever. So, of course, after Jasmine had talked to Sarah about how they met or whatever, Jasmine goes back up there to see Grace, and she comes in, and she has a little bit more details as far as what's going on with Grace and kind of like putting the puzzle together. So she sits down and she takes out the picture of the place where Grace and this rat, Shannon, who we getting ready to know about, where they had met. And so when she places the picture on the desk or whatever, or the table, she says, who you been talking to? Grace says that to Jasmine. She was like, who you been talking to? She was like, your friend, Sarah. What's wrong? And she was like, just shaking her head with tears in her eyes. She was like, please, Grace, tell me what is going on. Like, what did he do to you? Tell me, what did he do to you? Please talk to me. And so she's just looking like, oh God, do I really have to replay this or relive this by talking about it? So she go ahead and closes her eyes and build up the courage to go ahead and tell her story. So honey, she says heels. This is where she starts her story off. She was like, heels. I can remember wearing heels that day. And she said, you never know how your day is going to turn out or what can happen in one day. And that's what happened to me. And so she said it was a regular day. I was at work, minding my business. And of course, one of her coworkers or whatever give her a message that somebody had dropped off to her. And anyway, she takes the message, and it's the flyer of the place where she's going to meet this photographer. And it says, go, but big bold letters, go, from Sarah. And so she was like, this girl is something else. So she walks off smiling and laughing or whatever. And she decides, you know what? Okay, I do need to get out. Let me go ahead and go. So she goes that night to this art gallery. And she's looking around. And as soon as she comes in, this rat, and I'm going to call him Rat, but his name is Shannon. His name is Shannon. But anyways, he sees her come in or whatever. He's looking at her and she's admiring the photographs and the art and different things like that, just in awe of how beautiful it is. So he comes up to her and says, I'm sorry about the lighting. And she was like, oh, it's fine. He was like, but the best lighting is standing right here in front of me right now. And she was like, oh. And he was like, yes. And she was like, well, this painting or whatever is really, really, really nice. I like the art. And a lot of this is from Africa and Ethiopia. And he was like, yeah. And then Grace was like, she must be a very, very versed person and really knows about art or has an eye for art. And so Shannon says, well, how do you know it's a she? She was like, I can tell because, I mean, the way that she captures her pictures, only a woman can do that in depth. And he was like, interesting. And then she gets to looking at him and she sees like this necklace, I think, that was from somewhere in Africa or something. And she compliments it, and he was like, yeah, actually, I got this from Ethiopia. Got this necklace from Africa. And she was like, oh, that's really great. That's really great or whatever. And so this lady comes over and she said, well, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to snag this handsome hunk because we need him real quick. And so anyways, when she grabs him, they are introducing him as the artist behind all of the art. And she was just like, oh, it's him. I feel embarrassed because she was thinking it was for sure a she. And she was like, oh, okay. She was just looking or whatever. And he was talking and saying how, I'm a very shy person. I don't like being put on the spot. But when it comes to my art, I kind of come out of my shell. I hope you guys enjoyed it. And of course, spend your money because the proceeds will go to charities and it's for a good cause or whatnot. And she was just looking at him or whatever. And so she kind of like sneaks out and he just watches her leave. So anyways, the next day, honey, this rat, so she goes into, I can't stand this Negro. So anyway, she goes to her job and she goes in and she sees on her desk that this rat then left a rose and one of the paintings that she really, really, really loved. And she's looking at it and it is beautiful. It is gorgeous, the rose and this art on her desk and with the note with his name and his number on there. And she's just smiling like, how did this Negro find out where I worked? Like, he is something else. And then he delivered this to me. Like, she was like, And so she called Sarah. She was like, girl, I went to this art gallery last night, and guess what, girl? When I come into work, this Negro leaves me a rose and a painting. And Sarah was like, oh, it went better than what I thought, huh? And she was like, yeah, and he even left his number, girl. And she was like, well, what you gonna do? She was like, oh, I'm not gonna call him. She was like, what? Call him. And she was like, I just don't want to seem like I'm rushing or like I'm desperate or anything. And then he's kind of young. She was like, call him. Sarah was like, call him. And she was like, oh, girl, I can't with you. So she hangs up. And she didn't call him that day because she didn't want to seem like she was so desperate or whatever. So she waited a day. Even a day, that's still kind of, soon to be calling him. But anyways, she waited a day. And so she gets to work and she calls him and he picks up, he says, hello. And she was like, hi. And then he was like, Grace? And she was like, oh, don't act like you know who this is. He was like, yeah, no, this is Grace, right? And she was like, yeah. And she was like, well, I'm sorry. I thought you wouldn't know. He was like, no, don't apologize to me, and don't say sorry to me over the phone unless we gonna have dinner tonight. You can apologize to me and say sorry to me over dinner. I like to take you out. So anyway, she takes him up for his offer, and honey, they have their first date or whatever. They're at dinner, and he's sitting there talking to her or whatever, and they're just making small talk, and she was like, she has said something to the effect like, why me? Like, why me? And he was like, that's one of the things I remember you saying the night when I met you in the art gallery. Like, why me? And he was like, why not you? And she was like, And she was like, well, I have a few hangups, I got a divorce, and it's kind of hard when you have an ex-husband who cheated on you with their secretary and different things like that. He was like, oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. And so she was like, well, why aren't you married or with anyone? He was like, no, it's cool. No, he said, I spent most of my life traveling, and I never really had a chance to really like settle down. He was like, it had its perks, but I'm a military brat because, my father, he was in the military, and I traveled here, traveled there, so I'm very versed, and I got to see, well, versed with different cultures and lifestyles and different things like that. So I got to see a lot. So I'm not complaining too much, but I kind of suffered because I really didn't have a relationship or love. So I really couldn't connect like that. So she was like, oh, okay, that's interesting. So they're just sitting there laughing and talking or whatever. And so they go outside after their date, and they just talk a little bit more standing there. And he was like, so about your ex-husband, you said he owned a mortgage firm, or he has a mortgage business. And she was like, oh, you own that again? And he was like, no. He's like, when a man asks about your exes or ex-husbands, they're trying to find out if they measure up or if they're any competition. So no worries there. She was like, yeah, he owns a mortgage company or whatever. And he was like, oh, okay. And he was like, well, one thing he has up on me is that he's very rich and I'm not. And you are too. And she was like, well, yeah, he is very rich, but I'm not rich. And he was like, no. And she was like, no, I'm not rich at all. Like when he left me and we got a divorce, I just cut all ties with him and didn't want anything to do with it. He's the one with the money, I'm not. And I do fine by myself. I got a great job, and I paid for my own house and different things like that. So I'm doing pretty good. He was like, very strong and independent. I like that. And so they're just smiling or whatever. She was like, oh my gosh, where did the time go? It's 2 a.m. And he was like, oh, but that's okay. I wasn't even noticing. She was like, I can't believe we've been talking this long. And he was like, well, I can believe it. And he was like, so when can I see you again? And she was like, when do you want to see me? And he was like, well, shoot, if that's the case, I want to see you tomorrow. And so she says, okay. So anyways, they part their ways, honey. When she got into that car and she was driving, she was just smiling like a chess cat, just like, ooh, this man, he came out of nowhere and he's interested in me. But then again, she was like, what if he wants something? What if he wants something? But then she was like, but then again, that thing he said, why not me? Why not me? You know? I'm still attractive, even though he's younger. I'm still attractive. Like I deserve to be happy, and he's making me feel young again. He's making me feel alive. I'm just having these butterflies in my stomach. Like, what is this man doing to me, honey? She is just cheesing like a chess cat. She is just driving like, yeah, I got this young thing interested in me, and shoo. Ooh, and she's just so happy. So she goes home. She gets in the shower. She just smiling and like, oh, this man is making me come alive. I ain't had this much attention in 25 years, like since I've been divorced. And I ain't had this much attention. Nobody complimented me. And here this young man is complimenting me, paying me attention. Ooh, I'm loving all this. So she just soaking this up. She in the tub. She just, ooh, the shower or whatever. She was like, this man. And so they go on, they keep kicking it or whatever. He's just taking her on dates and they're just laughing and they're talking for hours on the phone. Just, do you know how like you do when you're in love? You're just like a little kid again and you just light up and you don't want to hang up. She was even sleeping on the phone with this Negro. They talking all night on the phone. She gets to work, she tired because they've been up talking all night. And so while she's at work, this Negro is texting her, just giving her everything that she's never had before and making her come alive or whatever. So they spend their amount of time of dating or whatever, just falling in love. And she was like, oh, this man, oh. She was like, this man can get just about anything out of me because she just kept falling for him because he was kind, he was sweet, he was romantic, he was just paying her all this attention and she was just loving it. And so this one particular day, he took her out somewhere really nice. And, you know, he had his hands over her eyes, was like, no, you can't peek yet. You can't peek yet. And she was like, oh, baby, what is this? Where are you taking me? He was like, do you trust me? She was like, yes, I trust you. Or so anyways, he like, turns her well, he takes his hand off her eyes and turns her around and she's looking all around and it is a gorgeous place. Like it's so gorgeous. It's like a lot of flowers and it's nighttime. And then like when he spins her around like 3 times, these fireflies, is that what you call them, those little bugs that light up, they start lighting up everywhere. She was like, oh baby, this is so beautiful. And so she turns around and she's just enjoying the view and all of this that's happening. And while she turns around, this rat gets on his knee. Shannon gets on his knee and he's there proposing to her. And he was like, you know, I love you. Will you marry me? Make me the happiest man alive and marry me. And she was like, oh my gosh, yes, yes. So honey, baby, I was just gonna say one time on their date when they was just dating or whatever, because she hadn't given this Negro none. But one time they was on their date and they was outside her house. He was like, I've been taking you out for a long time now. You never invited me in. Like, who in there? She was like, oh, Negro, don't even try me. You know ain't nobody in there. You know, I'm not ready for all that just yet. We cool like this. But honey, after he proposed to her, honey, she took that little young tenderoni in that house. When I tell you, she was hopping on that thing like it was no tomorrow. She was giving him the business. I was like, oh, go ahead, girl. Because she was every bit of 60 something. And she was just throwing that thing on him. Had that Negro whipped in that moment. I was like, ooh, she was really getting it in. And so she gave this man some, you know, now that he put a ring on it. They hadn't got married, but they was engaged. That's all she needed. You know, she figured like, okay, it's good, it's safe. He's gonna marry me. We're engaged or whatever. So she gave this nappy-headed rat some. But anyways, so he's making her breakfast or whatever, and she's just enjoying it. So it comes time for them to get married. And I guess they set a date. They got married. It was really beautiful. All of their friends and loved ones were there, and they just shared this moment and they got married. And he's still being Mr. Perfect, making her breakfast in bed and all of this and that. And it's just wonderful. And then this rat, this black rat, nappy-headed Negro, he started showing his booty, started showing his behind. So one night, she noticed that this Negro wasn't in bed. And so she was like, okay. it's late. Let me go see what this Negro doing. So she goes down the stairs. And this nigga is on the phone talking about, did you enjoy the fireflies? And she looking at him on the phone, and she was like, who you talking to? And so he looking like the black rat he is, talking about, well, I'll call you tomorrow. So he hangs up, and he's sitting there. He was mad. And she was like, who was that? He was like, Grace, there's two things I don't like. And she was like, okay. He was like, I don't like to be, what did this rat say? He said, I don't like to be interrupted, and I don't like nobody to sneak up on me. And she was like, well, baby, I guess I was just missing you. I was missing you, that's all. And he was like, I missed you too. With a smirk, and then he walked past her, and she was just looking like, okay, I don't like this too much, but okay. So anyway, she gets to talking with Sarah. And Sarah was like, oh, you know how men are. Don't pay him no mind. It ain't nothing. She was like, no, he was talking to somebody, and I really don't appreciate that. I don't appreciate that at all. He was talking to somebody. We just got married, and we already having problems with another female being in the picture. I know he was talking to a female, because it ain't gonna be no male that time of night. She was like, you know how men are. Don't worry about it. So anyways, as she was talking to Sarah on the phone, I guess the secretary where she worked, she came to her office, and she was like, boss man want to see you. And so she was like, okay, well, I gotta go, Sarah, because they want to see me. And Sarah was like, oh, okay, well, all right, talk to you later, bye. So she goes up in there, and I see all these men in the meeting room, and she comes in there. He didn't even wait 10 seconds. And he was like, you want to explain the 375,000 that's missing from your account? She was like, what? He was like, yeah, you want to explain that? It's your password, came from your computer, and this money is missing. You're fired. Now, see, this pissed me off, because she's been working for that company for years. And you mean to tell me you couldn't even investigate none of that, check into it? You had no faith in this woman? And she was like, I can explain, like, I didn't do it. He was like, I don't want to hear it. You're fired. Get your stuff and leave, or I'm going to have you escorted out. So, honey, she marches back there. She gets her stuff and take it out. She gets in the car. She's devastated, because she's worked at this company for years, and she can't figure out how this money is missing from her job, and how someone got her passwords and all of that. So she's frantic. So of course she tells Sarah to come over there. Sarah's over there, and she was like, now that this stuff is going on, I need my husband. I don't know where he's at, what he's doing. And Sarah was like, oh, you ain't heard from him? And she was like, no, he's probably with that wench he was talking to on the phone. She was like, no, just calm down. Just calm down. He'll come. You'll hear from him or whatever. So this rat comes walking up in there. And she was like, where you been? And no, he was like, hey. And she was like, where you been? He was like, I was out. What's up? And she was like, oh, so was you with that wench? And he was like, he was talking to Sarah. He was like, I'd like to talk to my wife in private. Do you mind if you leave? Because I like to talk to my wife. And she says, Sarah looks at him with a smirk. She says, I'm not going anywhere. And I was like, ooh. For you to be old, you real froggy. Like, you can take him, because if he wanted to, he could have pimp smacked her and knocked her dentures out and all the other stuff. I was like, she real jazzy, like, talking to this man like that. So he was just looking at her like, yeah. She said, I'm not going anywhere. And he was like, he just got tickled. And so Grace was like, no, Sarah, it's cool. I got this. And she was like, are you sure? And she was like, yeah, I'm sure. Just, you know, I'll take it from here. Thank you for coming. She said, you know where to call me. You know where to find me if you need me, okay? Call me. And she gave that rat the dirty look before she left or whatever. And so Grace was like, "Where you been? You know, I understand you was on the phone with some wench last night. Was you with her, huh? Was you with her?" And he just takes off his briefcase from around his shoulder, and he opens up the briefcase and threw these pictures on the table. He was like, "Take a look." He threw them down, and she picked them up and looked, and he was like, Grace, I was on the phone with one of the workers I was working with because I'm working with sick kids, and I thought that I would take these patients who have cancer to the spot where I proposed to you, and I was doing a photography shooting it in that same spot because I thought that you would like it because it would be so special because that's where I proposed to you. That's what I was doing. And she was like, "Oh, baby, I didn't know." He was like, "See, we already talked about this." He said, "No, F this, F this." And she was like, "No, baby, baby, wait. I'm sorry. I'm sorry." And he was like, I told you, I'm not going to be doing this. She said, "I'm sorry, baby. I just had the most horrible day. Like I just got fired." He was like, "What?" She was like, "Yeah, I just got fired. They fired me. They found out someone found out my passwords, and somebody is trying to steal my identity. They went into my computer, they hacked it, and they stole $375,000 from the company, and they fired me, and I don't know what to do. Like, I'm so confused. What is going on?" And he was like, "Oh, baby, I'm so sorry. Come here. I'm here. Just calm down. We're going to figure this out together. We're going to figure this out together. I promise." And so this black rat, is there. He's trying to help his wife or whatever, trying to get to the bottom of who it could be that's stealing her identity and all this and that. And they're just trying to get to the bottom of it. And so they keep searching. They call the police, and the police say, "Well, you're just going to have to go to somebody else because this is a different type of, this is a legal matter or something." I don't know. So anyways, she goes up there to talk to someone who can help her. Well, she goes to her bank or whatever, seeing if she can get some advice or something like that. But anyways, as she was there, she says, "Also, I want to talk to you." She was trying to get some money or something out of her bank. And the lady was like, "Well, your funds, you have 300, what was it? 350 something $1,000 that was taken out of your mortgage or for your home or whatever." She was like, wait a minute. No. I own my home. I owned it for 4 years now. What are you talking about? She was like, "No, you took out a loan to sell the house or something like that and get the money for it." And she was like, "No, I did not do it. You must be mistaken." She was like, "Yeah, it was notarized. It was signed and notarized." And she was like, "From who?" She said, "Actually, I have the address and name here. Here it is." And she goes to look. She was like, "That ain't ringing no bell." So she writes it down. She goes to this house, the address and the signature where it was. And she went there. Of course, it was an abandoned house or whatever. And nobody's there, hasn't been living there for a long while because all this mail that is piled up there or whatnot. And so she couldn't figure out what's going on. So she goes back to the bank and she was like, "Well, do you have surveillance tape? You could show me who this person was." Honey, the rat, her husband, is on surveillance, being the culprit as to why this money was taken out of the bank. Okay. And so she was like, oh, no, this Negro did not do this. So she's sitting there at her table, and this black rat comes in the house, and he's walking past, and then he saw her sitting at the table. He was like, hey, what's wrong? And she looking at him just very hurtful. And she was like, it was you. He was like, what was me? She said, it was you that took that money. And he was like, what are you talking about? And she threw the cell phone on the table. And then she said, well, take a look at your phone. So he picks up the phone, and he sees a recording of himself being the culprit taking his money. And so, of course, when he sees it, his cover is blown. He's caught. He's caught red-handed. And so he said, oh, baby, I needed the money. Like what I looked like coming to my wife asking for some money. Now I needed this money because these boys means business who I took the money to give back to these people I owe. They mean business. They can hurt me. She was like, I don't care about that. You put my money back. You put my money back. And she said it. Not only that, you was the one behind the passwords and all of that stuff. And he was like, what are you talking about? He was like, that ain't your money. That's my money just as much as it is yours. She was like, what? Put my money back? Put my money back. And he was like, no, obviously you don't know the law, do you? She was like, what do you mean? And he was like, as your lawfully wedded husband, I'm entitled to that money, and you ain't getting nothing. I deserve that money. I do. After messing with you, back behind you. And so he walks out and leaves, and at this point, she is in shock because he did a 360-degree turnaround. She could not believe that this nigga was telling her that. So she gets up and she goes in the living room. And at this point, she is just in shock. She's devastated. She's heartbroken. And in that moment, she knew that this was a scam and that she had been played. And she's sitting there crying. I was like, ooh, this low down dirty brat. Okay. I said, she's a good one. So she's just sitting there. She's crying. She don't know what to do. She just kept mumbling like, give me my money. Give me my money. He wasn't listening to her. So she goes upstairs, and he's laying in the bed like the log rat he is, smoking his cigarette. And she said, you know what? You need to give me my money. Give me my money. He was like, please. What you can get me is an ashtray. I need an ashtray. And he called her out of her name and everything. And he just laughed at her. Like when she was saying, give me my money, they're going to take me to jail and all of that if I don't replace this money. He just laughed at her. Now, baby, she is a good one. I was like, I know she is just not going to sit there. I would have took that cigarette and lit that bad lace front on fire. Okay, if he tried me and he laughed like this was a game, baby. Okay, I said, interesting. So, and yeah, he was like, go give me an ashtray, B. And so, I'm going to just say wench. And she leaves out of there, and she's just in shock. So the next day, she goes and tries to talk to someone about this matter to see if something can be done. And I think she has some troubles there because they are married. There's not much you can do. So she comes back to the house. And she goes in the house, and when she pulled up, She sees this Mustang, this gold Mustang in the driveway. She was like, whose car is this? I've never seen this car before. She goes in. And when she goes in, she hears some moaning and him talking like, yeah, you like that. And she was like, wait a minute, wait a minute, wait a minute. Let me see what's going on here because something don't sound right. I know I ain't hearing things. So she goes up the steps and sure enough, she can hear the banging and the moaning even more. She flies up them stairs and she swings open that door. She was like, what are you doing? And of course, he's laying there in the bed with another chick, screwing her in her bed. And she said, what are you doing, you low down dog? Get out my house. Get out my house. And the girl was like, oh my gosh, what's going on? And anyways, he gets up and he pushes her. He was like, man, get out of here. And so he pushes her out and he locks the door. She was like, you didn't tell me you was living with your mama. He was like, my mama, oh, I got to get these doors locked. She just come in, busting in. He was like, it's okay. It's okay. We going to pick up where we left off. So he goes back in the bed to finish the job. And she is like banging on the door. And she just goes downstairs because she know he's not going to unlock the door. She just goes downstairs. And she sits in her dining room. This rat decides when he gets finished doing what he do, he gonna come downstairs with her. And they just joking and laughing. And she was like, he was like, well, am I gonna see you again or something like that? And she was like, I don't know. Is your mother gonna be here next time? And he was like, hopefully she won't. She won't be. I'll make sure of that. And they just laughing and giggling. And she's in a dining room hearing all of this. So he walks her out and she leaves. And then he got the audacity to come in that dining room and put his measly nubs on her shoulder talking about something. You should have joined us. And he started laughing. He was like, you should have joined us. Like, you should have seen your face when you was up there. It's kind of like the face you're wearing right now. He was like, that was hilarious. And he's just sitting there. He was laughing. So he goes in the chair. He sits down. And he lights his cigarette. And she was just sitting there. And he was just going on this rant. He sits down. He was like, I was just joking about that. He was like, I'm just getting sick and tired of this. I'm getting sick and tired of this. I'm getting sick and tired of you. And then he was like, no, I don't mean to yell. He was like, honestly, you're a really nice lady. You are. You're one of the nicest ones I've ever met. He was like, you're real nice. He said, and I do love you. I do love you. He said, but I just don't love you the way that you love me. He said, you're tired. You're lonely, you're weak, you're pathetic. You better be glad I'm even dating you. I should be compensated messing around with you. You're old. Like, what were you thinking? He said, but I just don't love you the way that you love me. And honey, she's just, as this nigga is talking, she's losing it. Like, how like you can hear something and it just gets lower and lower and lower in sound. I think everything that he was saying about her, everything just piled up from him stealing her password, stealing the money from her job. She lost her job. She lost all the money in the bank because he took some money, out of the bank without telling her. And then trying to act like it wasn't him. It was just a combination. Then he was sitting there dogging her, just going in it. He wouldn't stop. He just kept going in. You're pathetic. You're lonely. You're old. You're this. You're that. And you're weak. And honey, she came up. And this is where I was shocked. And I was kind of happy too. She picked up a bat in that dining room. She brought that bat in there and she just, And oh, she was tearing him up. And I was like, yes, yes. Beat him to the white meat. Beat him to a pulp because he deserved everything that's coming to him. Beat him good. And she just kept hitting him and hitting him. It seemed to have lasted for 30 minutes. Now, I don't condone violence, but y'all niggas need to quit playing with these women, especially these elderly women, because they ain't got nothing to lose. You're wasting their time. So anyway, she's beating this nigga to a pulp, and blood is splashing everywhere. It's all on her face. And I was like, yes. I mean, I know it's wrong, Lord. Please forgive me. I don't condone violence. But in this moment, I felt so liberated. I was like, yes, finally, she did something to him and he deserved it. So after she beat him to a pulp, she just got his body out the chair and she dragged him all through the house to the basement area. She opens the basement door and just throw that nigga down there like he is one of those play dolls. Like she just threw him down the steps. He went rolling down the steps and he looked like a dummy, laid out on the floor in the corner somewhere. Banged up, like beat to a pulp. And I was like, it's not funny, but it's like that's what he get. So she gets out the house and she's just driving. She don't know where she's driving to. She just driving. So she's in the middle of nowhere and she calls Sarah. And she was like, Sarah. And she was like, huh? What's wrong, baby? And she was like, I killed him. And she was like, what? You killed who? And she was like, I killed Shannon. He's at the house. And so, of course, Sarah hangs up. She goes to the house, apparently. And this is where things turn. This is where everything turned. Now, mind you, Sarah is the one who introduced Grace to Shannon. And so I started putting two and two together. I was like, wait a minute. Something's not right. So anyways, what ended up happening is, of course, Jasmine is still working on her case or whatnot. And the last time that she went in to see Grace, Grace was losing hope, but Jasmine was just getting started. She was getting passionate about her case because she was gathering more and more details. And so Jasmine was like, look, please do not plead guilty. I know you're not guilty. Like, please, this is your last chance, because actually Jasmine boss, he was telling her to wrap things up. And he was like, no, never mind. Since you can't do it, I'm going to do it. I'll go down there and do it. So Jasmine goes up there to talk to Grace one last time. She's like, please, you need to hurry up because my boss is on his way. He's going to make you sign for the deal, and you're going to sign to be guilty, and I don't want you to do that. Like, please, I know that you're innocent. Please let me fight for you. This is your last chance. He gonna come down here and mess things up, and you gonna be guilty, and you're gonna get locked up for something I know you did not do. I know you didn't do it. Come on, please. And so she's sitting there thinking about it. She's considering it. And so anyways, Jasmine boss comes and he was like, well, I'm here with the papers so you can go ahead and sign, because you still want to plead guilty, right? And he was like, right, do you want to plead guilty? And she was like, no, I don't. I want to go to court and do this trial. And so of course Jasmine is so happy that she's not going to sign by saying like she's guilty. And so I was like, yes, thank you, because it just ain't right. So anyways, Jasmine boss Roy, he was not too happy about that. He said, I know when they get outside, after she said she don't want to say that she's guilty anymore, when they get outside, he was like, I know you influenced her, but I tell you what, when you lose, just know you ain't got no job no more. And she was like, whatever, whatever. So anyways, they go on trial or whatever, and she is stacking up her evidence against, the case or whatnot. And she's doing good until like she started calling witnesses to the stand and everything like that. Now, when she called Sarah to the stand, Grace's friend, she was asking her, well, how long have you known her? She was like, I've known her for 6 years. And she was like, do you know her to be violent or the type of person that would kill someone? And she was like, who, Grace? She was like, oh, no, she couldn't kill anyone. No. And they had asked her, well, did you talk to Grace on the day that she supposedly allegedly killed her husband? And she was like, no. And then she was like, yes, but it was just for a quick second. And so, of course, they didn't have no more questions. So when this other person came in to talk to her on the stand, he really got to her. He was like, now you said under oath that you didn't talk to her, but then you turned around and said that you did. Did you or didn't you? And that kind of like caught her up, and she was like, I don't, he was like, I know you're trying to protect your friend or whatever. What are you hiding? What do you have on her? What did she say? So she breaks down and she said, well, actually, she did tell me that she killed her husband. So this was a big thing because it's like, okay, you're representing someone who got evidence. Her friend has evidence on her. Like, what are you doing? I told you that you was going to lose. Why did you want to go to trial? Look at you now. And so she is devastated because here she is for once being passionate, and now there's a twist, a monkey wrench in the play here. She didn't know about these recordings or the phone call. She didn't know anything about that. So she's devastated. And so the following day, the next day, she wants to talk to the judge when they're in court or whatever. And she said, I want to bring Miss Sarah to the stand again. And the judge was like, no, we already handled that yesterday. We're not doing that. And she just kept saying, I want to bring her to the stand. He was like, look, Missy, like, pull yourself together. You got your panties in a bunch. But if you don't pull yourself together, I'm going to have you escorted out of here. Do you understand me? And she kept saying, no, I want to put her on the stand again because I failed to ask such and such. And so he's like, okay, get her out of here. So she ended up going to jail. So her boss, Roy, comes there and he was like, I don't know what got into you. You passionate for once, and then you represent someone and you don't even know all of the facts and details. Like, what are you doing? So anyways, her husband is able to get her out because he's a cop, as you know. Jordan, he's a cop. And so he get her out of jail or whatever. And he was like, well, don't worry about it, baby. Don't worry about it. And she was like, I just don't know what to do. Finally, for once, I'm passionate and I'm up to here with it. He was like, don't give up. I believe in you. So when he encouraged her, even though she messed up, her passion was reignited. So anyway, she has to go over to talk to Sarah again because after all she did say in court, what Grace had told her, she was like, look, this is really getting out of hand. If there's anything that you know, please tell me. I know you're trying to protect your friend. That's your best friend, but please let me know. And so Sarah was like, well, if you knew a secret that no one was supposed to know, how would you handle it? Would you tell anybody? And I think Jasmine was just like, just depends on what it is. But if it's something serious that can cause a lot of people to get in trouble, I would just go ahead and tell. And so she was like, well, I went to the house that night. And Jasmine was like, uh-huh. And she said, I actually saw Grace's son there. And she was like, you saw her son? And she was like, yes, I think he was the one that got rid of the body, or Grace herself did it in the heat of a passion and didn't remember her taking that body off and dumping it somewhere. And so Jasmine was looking at her like, oh my gosh, maybe you're right. So Jasmine goes and tells her co-workers, Talisa and Donnie, that, Sarah just told her basically that Grace is trying to protect her son in all of this and blase or whatnot. So she feels like that is a breaking point in the case, and that for sure tomorrow when they go to court, that she was more than likely going to be found guilty. So anyways, it's time for the last trial day, and they're in court or whatever, and she's doing her best to try to represent Miss Grace the best she knows how. And then, of course, with all the evidence that's stacked against Miss Grace, they found her to be guilty. But Grace, she was like, well, you did the best you could. And I know my friend sat up there and said that I called her and told her that I killed my husband. So I knew after that was going to be it. She was like, don't feel bad. So anyways, they told her she's guilty. And as she was going back, she happened to look out there at her son, because her son was there at the trial. And she saw her best friend Sarah, but what she noticed that was a little alarming was the necklace that she had around her neck. It was the same one that Shannon wore. And she was like, wait a minute. And everything started flashing before her eyes. Like the time that her friend Sarah told her about this art gallery, telling her about this photographer she knew, and telling her about meeting this guy, and just everything started flashing. And she was like, oh my gosh, as she was getting in her handcuffs, as she was being taken back there. And while she's back there, she just keep on, everything is flashing before her eyes. And she discovered that this wench, Sarah, is the one who is behind all of this. Because how did she get that necklace around her neck? Okay, because she did go to the house, because she called Sarah as soon as she killed her husband, allegedly. She called Sarah. Sarah went there. So why would Sarah have her her ex-husband's necklace on? So she has this flash before her eyes, and she calls the guard. She was like, guard, guard, guard. So she's trying to alert somebody to tell them what all she has pieced together. She knows for a fact that Sarah is indeed a part of this whole equation. So anyways, after they lose the case, Jasmine's husband was just being very supportive, and they was riding or whatever. And she said, well, I'm going to go over here to see Miss Sarah, because I know she's probably feeling a little bit down now that her friend has been found guilty and they're going to lock her up or whatnot. So I'm going to check on her. And she was like, well, you late for work, so I'm just going to walk the rest of the way. It's not that far. And her husband was like, are you sure? And she was like, yeah. So anyway, she get out of the car, and as she's walking to Miss Sarah's house, she happens to see Alice. You remember the older lady that was in the window when she first initially went to Sarah's house? Anyway, she see Alice with some groceries, and she was like, oh, Jasmine was like, oh, I know you. I met you before. She was like, yeah. She was like, how you doing? She was like, I'm doing fine, but I want to go home. And Jasmine was like, but you are home. This is your home right here. I'm going to take you inside. She was like, no, my house. And she was just like, okay, this is an old senile lady. She don't know what she's talking about. She's talking outside of her head. She gets her, and she's taking her to Sarah's house, and she's taking her inside. And as she's taking her inside, she just started talking more and more. She was like, I don't want to go in here. I don't feel safe here. It's not safe here. I can't save all the others. And she was like, no, it's okay. What are you talking about? She said, I want to go home. And she tells her full of dress. And when she tells her this full of dress, address. She's having like this flashback in her mind. She was like, wait a minute, that's the same address that Grace told me about. So everything's flashing before her eyes, and she was listening to the lady. She was like, yes, the women's downstairs, they all are trapped down there and they need help. They need help. They've been kidnapped, and I want to go home too, but I don't want to get in trouble for it. And she was like, you shouldn't be here. And she was like, oh my gosh, like, what have I walked in on? Actually, she was talking to Alice and she said, "No, I'm gonna go see what you're talking about." So anyways, Jasmine goes down there to the basement area where Alice told her the girls were. And she goes down there and she sees all these people in handcuffs, chained to this steel bars downstairs. They just look like a bunch of animals, just pack of animals down there that's been down there for years or whatever. And she was like, oh my gosh. So anyways, Shannon is down there and he grabs her and he ties her up and he locks her away. And then upstairs, as Miss Sarah comes home, she sees Alice sitting in the kitchen. And of course, Alice tells on herself. She was like, I didn't mean to say anything. I don't want to get in trouble. Please don't hurt me. And Miss Sarah was like, what are you talking about? So she knew that somebody had been there. So she runs to check on her son. And as she's running to go check on her son, Alice gets up and leaves. And I guess she goes for help. Calls for help. But Miss Sarah's down there, and of course, she asks her son, Shannon, she was like, did you get her? Did you get her? He was like, yeah, I got her. And then she goes and opens the door and see Jasmine. She got her mouth tied up and her hands tied up, and she was like, see, you should have been minding your own business. Now look at you. Now look at you. Look what happens when you stick your nose where it's not supposed to be, or whatever. So anyways, of course, when Alice goes to get help, Jasmine's husband, Jordan, is over there to Miss Sarah. So anyways, he come knocking on the door and Sarah answers it. And she was like, yes, how can I help you? He was like, is my wife in here, Jasmine? And she was like, no, she's not in here. He's like, well, I dropped her off here. And she was like, no, she's not here. And so he was like, well, can I come in? She was like, do you have a warrant? And he was like, no. And she was like, exactly. So she closed the door. So he stands right there on the porch and he calls his wife's phone. When he calls his wife's phone, he hears it ringing because his wife, Jasmine's phone is on the kitchen table right there by the door, basically. So when he hears that, he goes off, he kicks in the door. And then a tussle begins. Like Miss Sarah, for her to be old, like she can really hold her own. That's why she was talking all the mess that she was talking when I thought she was innocent a while back when she told Shannon that she wasn't going nowhere when Grace and Shannon was getting into it. Yeah, she was tussling with him, keeping up with him and fighting him. But of course, a man is way stronger than a woman, and an old woman at that. So he handcuffs her and on the table, and he tells her to stay right there. But of course, when he leaves to go find where Jasmine is, she goes out the door with the handcuffs. And so he goes down there, and of course Shannon is down there and they get to fighting or whatever. And Jasmine is watching this and hearing this, and she was like, well, actually, her husband came down there and saw Jasmine. He was like, oh, baby, why you look at you, you're tied up. Why are you tied up? And Jasmine was trying to tell him, look behind you, but he couldn't. So that's when they got into a tussle. So Jasmine actually was able to get loose, and she untied her mouth and her hands. It wasn't with handcuffs that she was hand tied with. It was something loose. So she gets up and she picks up the gun that Shannon did have, and she shoots him. She has no choice but to shoot him. Of course, he's shot and he's dead, and they're able to get out. And what ended up happening was they discovered that Miss Sarah and Shannon had been stealing Social Security checks from older women, running a scam on them, and they've been doing this for 20 plus years. Doing this for 20 plus years, just evil like that. So, and then on the news, they said that Miss Sarah is still on the run. We don't know her whereabouts or whatnot. And anyways, Grace is able to get out of jail. She's not guilty. They found out that she was innocent, that she did not kill him because obviously he was still alive. And she got off, and of course, the media and all of them were asking her how she feels that now that it's over. And she was like, oh, it's not over. It's far from over. It's not over. And so they're walking off or whatever. And then the scene skips to this Pop Tart, Sarah. She's on to her next victim, and she sees this. I guess the white lady is interviewing her, and she was like, "Tell me again, why do you want to do this job?" She said, "Well, because I love the elderly and I love helping people. They're very, very nice, especially elder people." And she was like, "Great. Would you like to meet my mother?" She said, "Oh, yes, of course." And she was like, "Well, didn't you say your mother had some type of business? I don't know." And they go inside. So as you know, it ain't over. Like, she's planning to do this to someone else again, even though all that stuff got unfolded and uncovered. She's willing to do this again. So she's still on a prowl, but her son is dead. So I don't know how she's going to do this by herself, but because you always need a partner. But I guess she feels like she's that good where she can do it alone. Honey, when I tell you this movie was full of drama, that's exactly what I mean. So that is the movie in a nutshell. That's where it ends. And Tyler, you are a mess for this one. I love it. Keep the drama coming. And yeah, that is my review of A Fall from Grace. Ciao.